Hi, this is Mrs. Shope. Today our objective is to be able to evaluate expressions involving negative and zero exponents. First, we're going to talk about zero powers. Anything to the zero power is equal to 1. So if I take the number 100 to the zero power, that is going to equal 1. When I take x to the zero power on number 2, that will also be 1. Because any number to the zero power is 1. I don't know what number x is, but I do know when I take it to the zero power, I get 1. On number 3, I have the number -7 to the zero power. Since -7 is in parentheses, it means take the number -7 to the zero power. Well, any number to the zero power would equal 1. Number 4 is a little different. It's -7 to the 0. There are no parentheses. So this means my answer is negative, and I'm going to find 7 to the 0. 7 to the 0 is 1. So this turns out to be a -1 because there's a negative sign out in front. Next, we're going to talk about negative powers. When your exponent's negative, you make it a fraction, and 8 to the -2 moves to the denominator and becomes 8 to the second. The negative exponent just means move that to the other part of the fraction. So I'm moving the 8 to the -2 to the denominator. When I move it, now my exponent is a +2, and this would be 1 over 8 to the second. Well, 8 to the second is 8 times 8. That would be 64. So it would be 1 over 64. On number 2, I have the number -9 to the -2 power. So since the exponent's negative, I'm going to make my answer a fraction. The -9 to the second is going to go to the denominator. When I move this to the denominator, I had a -2 power. It becomes a +2 power. If -9 is a parentheses, it means take -9 times -9. A negative times a negative would give me a +81. So this would be 1 over 81. Number 3 has a negative exponent. So I'm going to make it a fraction, and when I move this 4 to the third to the denominator, the -3 then becomes a +3. And then 4 to the third would be 4 times 4 times 4. So 4 times 4 is 16. 16 times 4, this would be a 164. On number 4, I have the number -6 to the -2 power. That means I need to make it a fraction, keep my -6 in parentheses, but now it's to the second power. This means -6 times -6. A negative times a negative will give me a +136. All right, if you look at 5 through 8, we're going to evaluate when we have variables. So if the exponent's negative, we move it to the denominator. The -3 would become a +3. So my answer would be 1 over 8 to the third. On number 6, c to the -6 would be 1 over c to the 6. When you move it to the denominator, the exponent is no longer negative, it's positive. The exponent being negative just means move it. So on number 7, I'm noticing x and y both have negative exponents. That means I'm going to move them both to the denominator. This would be an x to the 4th. This would be a y to the 5th when I move them. So my answer would be 1 over x to the 4th, y to the 5th. Number 8, w is to the -1 power, so I have to move it to the denominator. And then it becomes w to the first power. Whenever you have an exponent of 1, you do not need to write that 1, so you could just say 1 over w. Okay, so on number 1, we're going to evaluate -4 to the -3 times the number -4 to the third. Well, the bases are the same, they're both -4s, and when I multiply, I add my exponents, so I'm adding a -3 plus 3. Well, -3 plus 3 is 0. This is really the number -4 to the 0. Remember, we just learned any number to the 0 power is 1. So this final answer would be 1. On number 2, I have 2 to the 8th over 2 to the 10th. Remember, when we divide bases that are the same, we subtract our exponents. So we take 8 minus 10. 8 minus 10 will give me a 2 to the negative 2. Well, since the exponent's negative, that means it moves to the denominator and becomes 2 to the second. 2 to the second means 2 times 2, so this would be 1 over 4, would be 1/4. On number 3, I'm multiplying, and the bases are the same. The bases are both 7. So when I multiply, I add the exponent. So I'm adding negative 7 plus 5. Negative 7 plus 5 would give me a negative 2. So I'd have 7 to the negative 2. That means make my exponent a negative, or my exponent is a negative. That means move it to the denominator, and it becomes 7 to the second. 7 to the second would be 7 times 7, 49. So this would be 149. All right, looking at number 4, we have division. Remember, on division, we subtract our exponents. So we're going to take 8 minus 9. So when you do 8 minus 9, you get a negative 1. So this is the number negative 5 to the negative 1 power. Since my exponent's negative, I have to move this negative 5 to the denominator, and it becomes the first power. But remember, if our exponent's negative, we move it to the denominator, and if we have a power 1, we don't have to really write it. So this is like a 1 over just negative 5. And you can even think about, well, I got a positive 1 divided by a negative 5. A positive divided by a negative, that just means my answer is negative. It's really the same as negative 1/5. Okay, on number 5, I have two fractions that I'm multiplying. Okay, so what I could do is just multiply across. 1 times 1, 1. I can take 5 to the 8th times 5 to the negative 6 because the bases are the same, they're both 5s. But when I multiply, I add 8 and negative 6. 8 plus negative 6 would be positive 2. This would be a 1 over 5 to the second. And since I'm evaluating, I'm going to go ahead and take 5 times 5 to get 25. So this would be 1/25. On number 6, I've got a 3 to the 7th times 3 to the negative 4 in the numerator. So I can multiply these. The bases are both 3's. When I multiply, I add 7 and negative 4. So 7 plus negative 4 would be positive 3. And then I would have a 3 to the 3rd over 3 to the 3rd. Well, the bases are the same. So when I divide, I subtract my exponents. So I take 3 minus 3. This would be the same as 3 to the 0. But remember, any number to the 0 power is 1. So my final answer is 1. On number 7, I have a fraction bar, which means to divide. So when I divide, I subtract my exponents. I got to start with the 6 first, minus 7. Well, 6 take away 7 is a negative 1. This is the same as 6 to the negative 1. But since my exponent's negative, I'm going to make it a fraction and write 6 to the first. Which really, remember, we don't need to write to the first power. So this would just be a 1 over 6. Okay, now we're going to simplify. And when the directions say simplify, we need to write our answer using only positive exponents. So if I look at number 1, I'm noticing I have a y to the 0. The negative 6 is not to the 0 power, it's really to the first power. When the exponent's not written, it's really a 1. So y to the 0 equals 1. This would be like a negative 6 times 1, because y to the 0 is 1. Well, negative 6 times 1 is negative 6. On number 2, I'm noticing that I have division. So if I have division, I'm going to subtract my exponents. So I'm going to start with negative 5, and then I'm going to subtract 3. Well, this is like a negative 5 and a negative 3. That's going to make negative 8. So this is going to be 8y to the negative 8. I have not simplified all the way because when I simplify, I've got to make sure that my final answer only has positive exponents, and I've got a negative 8. So I'm going to move this y to the 8 to the denominator. Remember, when I move it, the exponent now is a positive 8. But this 8 is really to the first power. So it doesn't move. 1 is a positive number. The 8 stays. They only move when the exponent's negative. So my final answer would be 8 over y to the 8th. On number 3, when I multiply, remember, add the exponents. -6 and -2 make -8. But my exponent's negative, so it's not simplified all the way. So since it's a -8, I move it to the denominator. My final answer would be 1 over b to the 8th. All right, looking at number 4. This 7 is really to the first power. Since there's not an exponent, it's really to the positive 1 power. So the 7 stays in the numerator. It doesn't move. But x has a negative exponent, so it moves to the denominator, and when I move it, it becomes x to the positive 3. So my answer would be 7 over x to the 3rd. All right, directions are simplify again. We've got to make sure that our exponents are all positive when we do this. So on number 5, I'm noticing I have a c to the 8th divided by a c to the 14th. Also, my 12 is really to the first power. So it's going to stay in the denominator. It's not going to move because the exponent is a positive 1 for the 12. Now here when I divide, I'm going to take 8 minus 14. So this is really c to the 8 minus 14. 8 minus 14 would be -6. So it's c to the -6 over 12. But I haven't simplified all the way because my exponent's negative. So that c to the -6 needs to move to the denominator, and it becomes c to the 6. Remember, 12 is still going to stay in the denominator because it's really a 12 to the positive 1. If the exponent's positive, it does not move to the other part of the fraction. It stays where it is. So I do not have anything left in the numerator. It's the same as having a 1. It's the same as 1 over 12 times c to the 6. All right, number 6. I have a 3m to the -5 times a 4n to the 3rd. So my coefficients, the 3 and the 4, the numbers in front of the variables, I can multiply those, 3 times 4 to get 12. I have an m to the -5 times an n to the 3rd. Well, these bases are not the same. One is the variable m, one's the variable n. So I cannot add -5 and 3. I cannot add the exponents if the bases are different. So it's really an m to the -5, n to the 3rd. So what do you think? Have I simplified all the way? No, I have not, because I have an m to the -5 power. So I'm going to keep the 12 where it is. Remember, because this is a 12 to the first. N to the 3rd stays in the numerator because it doesn't have a negative exponent, it has a positive. But this m to the -5 moves to the denominator and becomes m to the 5th. So I did need to move that to the denominator since I have a negative exponent. Okay, number 7. I'm noticing that I have a 5 to the -2. Well, that needs to move because the exponent's negative. So it moves to the denominator and it's 5 to the 2nd. C to the 0, that's a 1. So this is like a 1. And then I'm noticing, hey, I have a w in the numerator and a w in the denominator. So I can subtract these exponents. So this is really a w to the first power. So what I'm doing is taking 1 minus -5. Well, a minus negative becomes a big plus. This is 1 plus 5, that is 6. So when I divide w to the first by w to the -5, I subtract 1 minus -5 to get 6. That would give me w to the positive 6. Okay, well, I do not need a 1 times w to the 6. If my coefficient's 1, I don't need to write it. 6 is a positive exponent, so it stays. 5 to the 2nd, 2 is a positive exponent, so it stays where it is in the denominator because it's positive, it doesn't move. But I could take 5 times 5 and get 25. So my answer would be w to the 6 over 25. Okay, number 8, I have division. I'm noticing I have a 12 in the numerator and a 6 in the denominator. So I could do 12 divided by 6 to get 2. I could also do cancellation, like when we multiply fractions. Remember, you can do cancellation with a numerator and denominator. You could say 6 goes into 12 twice, 6 goes into 6 once. I'm still going to get my 2 or 2 over 1. Remember what we do when we divide exponents? What do we do when we divide exponents? What are we going to do with the 7 and the 10? Yes, we're going to subtract. So we're going to take 7 minus 10. 7 minus 10 is like a 7 and a negative 10. 7 and negative 10 make negative 3. So this is going to be x to the negative 3. Have I simplified all the way? No, because I have a negative exponent. So 2 is really to the first power. Remember, if there's not an exponent written, it's to the positive 1 power. So the 2 stays in the numerator. The x to the negative 3 moves to the denominator, and when you move it, the exponent becomes a positive 3. So my answer would be 2 over x to the third. Okay, so hopefully you understand how to evaluate expressions involving 0 and negative exponents. If you struggled a little bit, I would suggest that you go back and watch the video again. You can also go to IXL to practice. Your assignment today is page 432, numbers 5 to 27 all. So the way you're going to do your assignment is you're going to go to the Perry Township website. You're going to click on Evaluate on the right. Then you're going to click Big Ideas Math, and then click Assignments. Once you click Assignments, you'll see this page 432, numbers 5 through 27.